Hi and welcome to this 3D Studio Max training video. My name is Gavin. A lot of you may know me as Gavin B of CG Talk, and what we're going to be doing in this video is just taking a look at scripted custom attributes. Now, scripted custom attributes are basically a way of adding new values and attributes to an object that already exists within 3D Studio Max, whether that's a piece of geometry, a modifier, texture, anything really that you may want to add additional information to. Then you would use custom attributes. I mean, for instance, one of the uses of that would be, for instance, game development. I've used them before when exporting geometry to a game engine. It was for player information. We actually used MaxScript to assign values to the geometry for initial health, initial life, initial starting position, and then when we used the actual game exporter that we've made, it exported these values with the geometry, so when they were brought into the game engine, these values were already there, ready to be used by the actual engine itself. And again, you can use them for project specific information if there's values that you need to assign to an object. For instance, if you were making a script that did certain animation and you needed a new value to be assigned to each object, then you could use custom attributes to assign the value to the object before you go ahead and create the script that does the animation. There are plenty of different uses for custom attributes. What we're going to basically be doing today is looking at creating a custom attribute that assigns a new X, Y and Z value to an object so that we can actually create a new rollout in the parameters section. So for instance, if I just show you, we'll create a sphere. What it'll do is it'll create a new rollout under here of the object that's selected, and it'll have an X, Y and Z spinner that we can use to change the X, Y and Z position of the actual object itself. Not very useful, probably not very practical, but it is a good demonstration. Once we've done that, we'll then go ahead and create another script that will make a dialog box that we can use to actually get the values of the selected object and display them, just to show that you can actually access these values outside of the object itself. So if we just go ahead and load up MaxScript, we'll start a new script. Obviously what we need to do first is tell MaxScript that we're creating attributes to be assigned to an object, and we literally do that by typing attributes. We then need to pass it a name. This can either be a string, a descriptive string, or it can actually be a name itself. We're going to use a name which is going to be pos attribs, so position attributes. Okay, and again, when you're naming things within MaxScript, it's obviously helpful to name them in a way that's going to be meaningful to yourself, so you know what it's associated to. There are other parameters that you can pass through to the attributes command, such as initial rollout state, which will set the state of all the rollouts that you create. There's also a version, which is a number, like a version number that you, so every time that you recreate the script you could assign a version number to it. And I think the other one, if I remember rightly, is silent errors, where you can turn silent errors on or off using a boolean value. And obviously with that you can suppress error messages that may pop up in 3D Studio Max if there's a script error. We only want to pass it a name for now, we don't really need to do anything else. One thing that we will do, thinking about it, is actually assign these attributes to a variable to just make it easier for us to reference them later on when we're actually assigning them to an object. So if we just go ahead and do new attrib equals, we'll go down to the next line and just go ahead creating the open and close brackets like we do for all blocks of code. And then, if you may remember from previous videos, we've done a parameters block which is used to basically capture values from a rollout, and we can use that then if the scene is saved with these attributes to an object. Obviously it will save and load with the scene as we load and save the scene. So we'll go ahead and do that here as well for the X, Y and Z value. So we'll do parameters, we'll call this pos param, as in position parameters. We then need to tell it a rollout that we want to associate these parameters with. Now obviously we haven't created any rollouts yet, and it's actually spelled with two L's, but we can pick a name now, and then obviously when we get down to do the rollout, we'll then use the name that we pick now. So we'll call it OPT roll, as in options rollout, and then we want to go down, open and close brackets, as we always do. Now we need 3 values in here. We'll just create the value once and then copy and paste it 3 times, just renaming it. And what we want is xpos, which is going to be obviously storing the x position. We're going to tell it that we want it to be of type float. We want to associate it with a user interface element. Now again, we haven't created any yet, but we'll pick the names now. The name that we'll pick will be xspin. When we get to create the spinner, we'll call it xspin, and we'll give it a default value of 0. As I said, we'll just copy that, and we'll just rename parts of it. So this will be ypos zpos. We'll get that right eventually. And again, that needs to be zspin and yspin. So we've got the x position there, the y position there, and the z position there. And that's all that we want for this parameters block. So what we'll do next is just go ahead and create a rollout. Now, if you remember rightly, we've already picked a name, which is OPT roll, so we have to use that here. And when we pick the caption, we might as well just go ahead and call it options. And then, as always, open and close brackets. Now again, we need to create 3 spinners, so we'll just create one, copy and paste it twice, and just change the values as and where we need them. So we'll do spinner, and again, we've actually already picked a name for it, which is xspin. We've done that up here. We'll give it a caption of x position. Type is float. Now for the actual spinners themselves, we don't really need to use this because float is the default value for a spinner, or default type for a spinner. So if we missed that off, it would automatically be assigned that it's going to be a float spinner. But we'll keep that in. And then we need a range. Again, the range is 3 values, and we're going to assign it a minimum value of -300, maximum of +300, and a default of 0, as we've already set default to 0 up here. And as I said, we'll just copy and paste and rename y and z. Okay, so that's the spinners done as well. What we then normally need to do is tell 3D Studio Max that we want to assign the custom attributes. Now we do that by typing cust attributes .add the $ to say to add it to the currently selected object, and then we need to pass it the attributes we want to add, which is this here, new attrib. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and assign the new attrib to the currently selected object, which is specified by putting the $sign. Okay, but at the moment this isn't really going to do much apart from add a rollout. It won't do anything with any of these values as and when we use them. So what we need to do is, after we've created the spinners, we're going to do some event handling, which is literally captures an event as it happens and executes an expression based upon what we find out. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is make it change the position as we move the roller. Now we can do that by basically doing on and then passing the name of the spinner, which is xspin, and then we can do button up, which literally means as we release the button off of the spinner, the value will then this event will then be executed. So we then do okay, and then open a bracket to tell it to obviously execute this expression, and we're literally going to be just saying on the current object we want to access the position, and we want to set that to xspin Y spin and Z spin. Okay, but the thing that we want to do as well, obviously, is tell it what parts of those we want to access or set what values we want. So we actually need to go in and tell it we want to use the value. So now we're saying set the position to be X spins value, Y spins value, and Z spins values for the X, Y, and Z of the currently selected object. Now we can go ahead and copy this whole event, and the reason that we need to do that is obviously we need to do it for all three spinners. The X spin, the X spinner, the Y spinner, and the Z spinner. We don't need to actually change any other values because every time we want it to do this. So what we could now do, move that over, create a sphere, evaluate, and now you see what we have here. We've got an X spinner, a Y spinner, and a Z spinner. Now nothing happens as I move it, but if I get up there and say let go at 80, or 88.7 to be precise, it moves the sphere about. Okay, now obviously I'm just picking on a sphere, it doesn't have to actually be a sphere. We could go in here and create a teapot. File, evaluate all. You'll now see that we have these values in here for a teapot as well. Okay, so you can apply them to really any kind of geometry or modifier or anything within the scene that you've got going. And again, this isn't really kind of a practical example. It has no functional use really, but it's there, it works. So one of the main problems that we have here though is that obviously it's doing it as we let go of the mouse button. What if we wanted it to move the object as we move the spinners? Well, that's possible too. We could use some different events to actually capture these values rather than the mouse up. So if we delete the teapot, go back to our Max script. Now we're using button up here. We can actually go in there and do changed. If we use changed, we then have to pass an argument over which basically will store the value for the spinner. Okay, so we'll do just new V for new value. Okay, I'll just show you on the X first, just to show you what happens. Pick on the good old sphere again. Come here, file, evaluate, and obviously when we go over here we have this new parameter. Now as we move the spinner, the object actually moves. Okay, so if we just go in here and change all of these to changed, we'll pass new value, new V as an argument. Delete the sphere and create a cylinder. File, evaluate all. Cancel, I don't want to close just yet. And there we have it. Okay, so you can see that all of those functionally work now as the value actually changes. One of the good things about these values, not specifically the X, Y and Z, but the values that we create using custom attributes, is obviously because we're using these spinners and things, that obviously we can actually animate those. So if we turned on auto key, for instance, jump right to the last frame and move position right the way over here, back, you can see obviously it's already highlighted this for and made it red to show you that obviously it is animated now. And if we went ahead and played, we can see obviously that this value changes over the time scale as we progress through the animation. And obviously if we wanted to, we could just pause that and drag that keyframe back here, or we could drag the keyframe anywhere we wanted, and it will animate the position. Okay, and as I said earlier, I mean, we're going to now just create a new script that will if I just close this and save this as custom attrib, we'll create a new script now that basically will display the values of these new attributes in a new window dialog box that we create. So 3dsmax script and new script again. Okay, and again we're just going to stick by using the cylinder there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new rollout. We'll just give it pass it a name, new roll, and we'll just call it getting attribs, and we'll just go ahead and do the create dialog, new roll, width of 200, height of 200, just so that's already in there. We'll leave the background colour and everything as it is, we don't need to change any of that really. Okay, so what we're going to do is create some labels, and we're going to call those V1 for value 1, give it a caption of value 1. Label V2 value 2. Label V3 value 3. So I mean, if we went ahead and evaluated that now, you could just see that we get 3 simple labels, just with some values already in there. What we'll have at the bottom then is a button. We'll call that B1, and we'll just give it a caption of get. So again, if we evaluate that, we'll have the captions followed by a little button. Okay, so what we'll do now is obviously just check whether the button's pressed. We do that by doing on B1 pressed do, then open and close the brackets. So when the button's pressed, what we want to do is grab whatever object is currently selected and assign it to these the actual values of the label. So the label values will change as and when we click the button. Actually, thinking about it, we may have to change that and not use labels. What we'll probably actually do is use text boxes instead, because obviously with labels it's static text, so we can't actually adjust the values of those afterwards. So what we'll do then is just go through and change them to text boxes instead. That may make it a bit easier. So we'll just come up and actually change these to edit text, which is a text box. We'll still call it V1. Okay, so it's still gonna hold that value in there, but obviously, as I say, what we'll need to actually do then is go through and give it a caption of value 1, and then we'll just pass it some text. So this is what's stored inside the text box. So this will be expos, and then we might as well just copy that, get rid of those two and replace them with bigger, meaner, leaner edit text boxes. So now if we go ahead and evaluate, we've got these boxes instead that we can actually type in, and it'll just make it easier for capturing the values. So on B1 pressed, we'll finish off this now. V1 dot text, so value 1 text, so we're going to be changing this part, the expos, okay, is equal to, now because we can't actually access the values stored inside these spinners directly over here, the actual spinners themselves, obviously we need to find a way of getting that information out. Now one of the ways of doing that is if we open up the script that we created for that, which is the custom attrib. One of the ways of accessing these values is via these parameters, or via the parameters in the parameter box, because they are linked directly to the spinner but they're accessible outside of the rollout. So if we do xpos v2 dot text equals ypos v3 dot text equals zpos. So that's just the x, the y, and the z position. Okay, so evaluate that now. Oh, sorry, we're trying to actually convert these to strings, so what we'll need to do is just put as string. Because they're floating point numbers, obviously, and the text box works with strings, we need to actually tell 3D Studio Max to treat them as strings. So again, evaluate all and get. Okay, so you'll see in these boxes we've actually got undefined for everything. Okay, so what's actually happening there is we're trying to access this using those custom attributes that we stored in the parameters blocks. The reason that we're getting undefined is obviously, although these are global, how does 3D Studio Max know what we're trying to access? So the way that we tell it that, again, is because they're custom attributes, we need to tell it what object we're trying to access these custom attributes from. So we do $dot in front of each one of them. File evaluate all, get, and now you'll see that it works fine. Okay, the reason I showed you obviously without the dollar signs in there is simply for the fact that it's important to get across that although these custom attributes are global, that we need to still tell it an object. Now obviously if I then deselected the object, we would get an error message because xpos is no longer a custom attribute. Okay, so if I just actually got rid of those and did it on a deselected object, so if I evaluate all, you would get undefined again, because although they're because it knows they're global, it knows what they are, where to find them, but obviously it doesn't have any values because it doesn't know where to try and get these values from. So we need to go back and obviously just put these back in, and it will only work with a selected object. Okay, so you can now see that changing any of those, we can get these values out of the object itself, so they are globally accessible. Don't need to save that script, get rid of that. So I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope that you can see that custom attributes are a really handy thing to try and use if you can, or if you need to, especially if you kind of work with games, or you can think of a way that you can use them in a specific kind of custom project that you're working on. And again, they do come in handy when you are using other scripts, because you can have these rollouts to assign values for animation. And if you have a script that is going through and animating objects, for instance in the position controller script, assigning these values to an object you can find very useful. Now obviously I haven't really gone into them in a great deal of depth, but you do get a basic idea of how they work. And as with anything when it comes to Max Script, if you do want to know more, it really is a good idea to obviously read through the Max Script reference, ask online, have a look around online. There's plenty of learning material, but I think what comes out of learning, you're only ever going to get to grips with by doing as much practice as humanly possible. Okay, so thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you.